Hello guys, welcome to a new video. Here we've got the Sigma 150-600 contemporary lens, and we're going to check out distortion. We're going to look at barrel distortion, pincushion distortion, and see how it does against flaring. And also I want to check out some image quality regarding vignetting on this lens. We're going to do the same on the Tamron. If you've not seen that video already, check it out because I've uploaded it recently. But I want to check out the Sigma contemporary lens as well on full frame EOS R as well as Aps-C 90D. So let's check out the samples and let's see how this lens performs. And thanks for watching. Hello everyone, we're just going to do a lens flare test on the Sigma contemporary 150-600. We're at 150mm at the moment, so let's just see how it does. Not doing a bad job. I don't see any major flaring problems going off. Obviously you can see better than I can in this video. I'm using the LCD. Guys, do never look directly to the sun when you're doing any sort of tests. That's why I'm using the LCD. So it's not a bad result really. Let's try this test at 300. So 300mm, let's go to the sun again. I don't see any major flaring going off, so we're having a good result, I think. Let's try that at 600mm. 600mm, let's go up to the sun again. No major flaring that I can see. So it's doing a good job testing the flaring capabilities of this lens. So yeah, not a bad job. Welcome to another segment of image quality assessment. We're on the EOS R full frame mirrorless camera. We're on the 150-600 Sigma contemporary DG lens. We're going to be looking at various apertures and different focal lengths. We're looking in particular at 150mm, 300mm, 400mm, 500mm and 600mm. I just want to give a rough idea of distortion really. We're looking at barrel distortion, which is normally affected at the wide end, and pincushion distortion is what's affected at the long end of your telephoto lens. So this is a zoom lens obviously. So we just going to go through all the different apertures briefly. I don't want to focus so much time on it. Just to let you know, we're going to be looking at vignetting on some separate wallpaper images I've got, because I want to assess that separately. Obviously, during the apertures, going through them, you will see brightness improve as we go further down the apertures. But that's to be expected when we change apertures, and obviously this lens, like the Tamron, is prone to vignetting, so that's something you need to keep in mind. You can obviously compensate for that through Photoshop, Lightroom and in-camera corrections. I don't like to use in-camera corrections because it gives you a false result in terms of what you're actually getting out of the camera and the lens. So without further ado, let's quickly look at the image. Okay, so first of all we've got 150mm at f5. Looking at the image, I see a tiny bit of barrel distortion but not a lot. So let's just go through it. So let's look at F5.6, slight improvement in brightness. Image quality is pretty much the same. F6.3, F8 and F16. So there you go, that's the apertures. Let's have a look at 300mm. Okay, 300mm on the EOS R full frame camera. So we're looking at 5.6 here. Let's have a look at 6.3. Slight improvement. F8. Slight improvement. F16. Okay, slight improvement in the corners, I think. Look at 400mm. This is going to be at, I believe it's F6.3. Then at F8 and F16. I think the corners do improve when we get to F16. So we want to be looking at 500 millimeters next, which is going to be at F6.3. I do think the corners look a bit softer at 6.3 if I'm honest, and sharpness in the centre isn't blowing my mind away, but there you go. F8, slight improvement. F16, and I think when we use F16 on this Sigma lens, I think that's when it brings the imagery to life, and I think the same is true of the Tamron that I looked at as well. So let's have a look at 600 millimeters at F6.3. So there you go, that's on full frame obviously at 6.3. To my eye it does seem to soften the image a little bit at this sort of magnification. Let's have a look at F8. A slight improvement but not a great deal. And let's have a look at F16. And I do think there's a little improvement at F16 on full frame. As I've said in other videos, when it comes to full frame, I think when you go down the apertures you do get an improvement, but when we have a look at Aps-C, that is not the case in my opinion. But we'll have a look at Aps-C in a minute. So that's the full frame results. Okay, this is the Aps-C 90D test. We're looking at distortion. We're just going to run through the various apertures at different focal lengths just to give you an idea on what sort of distortion you can expect. But looking at these images, there's very little distortion, mainly because we're using the center part of the lens, which is the sharpest part of these full frame lenses. So we've got a 32 megapixel sensor on D90D, as well as, if I didn't mention it previously, it's 30 megapixels on the EOS R full frame. So without further ado, let's run through the examples we've got here. So this is F5. Again, we will address vignetting later. This is F5.6, 6.3, F8, and we do have some improvement in the corners, very minor, and F16, and there you go. So let's look at 300 millimeters at F5.6. Again, that's pretty good. F6.3, F8. I think we seem to get some good contrast at F8 here, and F16. And there you go. Again, I do think at F16 we do see some improvement in the corners, but that's all. I don't see any other sort of improvement. So we want to look at 400 millimeters at 6.3. Again, it seems reasonable. Obviously the corners do suffer. You can see the corners here. They're not super sharp in the corners. So let's look at F8. Again, improvement in corners definitely. And F16. And I do think the corners do dramatically improve at F16. So we want to be looking at 500 millimeters now. So there you go. That's at F6.3. Again, I do think the corners suffer. I also think the centre suffers a tiny bit, not much. When we're looking at these Tamron and Sigma lenses, the differences are very minor in terms of sharpness. So that's 6.3 at 500. So we want to be looking at F8 next. Some minor improvement, and the corners improved a little. Let's have a look at F16. Again, there was minor improvement in the corners. So let's move on to the 600 millimeter range. Again, remember because it's a crop sensor camera, you times your focal length by 1.6. That gives you, instead of 600mm, we're getting 960mm. So this is a f6.3. Obviously it's not super tack sharp in the center, but it's reasonable. So let's have a look at f8. Some minor improvement in the corners. Let's just go back to f6.3 and then f8. Yeah, some tiny bit improvement, but it's really minor, guys. Very minor at f8. Let's have a look at f16, and again there's very minor improvement in the corners. But ultimately, I think you're not going to see much of a difference between f6.3, f8 and f16 in reality, in real life. So that's the examples that we have of the Apertures 90D samples. Okay, we're just going to take a look at vignetting. Just so you know, we've got a light box at this side here, projecting the light, so it may seem a bit darker on the right side, but that's just the way the light falls. So we're going to be looking on full frame here, the EOS R, and we're going to look at a few focal lengths and various apertures. So without further ado, let's have a look. So 150mm, let's just have a look how it looks at f5. So that's at f5, there you go. We do get a bit of darkness. Look at f6.3, then it brightens up a little bit. Then let's have a look at f8. Bit more brightening up there of the vignetting, and then f16. There you go. So let's have a look at 300mm. So at 300mm we're at f5.6. So let's have a look at f6.3. Some brightening. Then f8. Some more brightening even more. And then f16. And a bit more brightening in the corners. So as you can see, this lens, as does the Tamron, have quite a significant amount of vignetting. And if you're interested, the same is true of the Sigma Sport as well. But again, we're looking on the Sigma 150-600 contemporary lens here. So we're going to be looking at 500mm next. So obviously that gives you an indication on sharpness, obviously. So we're at f6.3 at this point. Let's have a look how it looks at f8. Bit more brightening going off. And then let's have a look at f16. And a bit more brightening as well. So let's jump to 600mm at f6.3. Looks reasonably sharp. Quite good amount of detail and contrast. Let's have a look how it improves in regards to the vignetting at f8. We have literally the whole frame becomes a lot brighter. And then for our final image we have it at f16. See how that does. And there you go. That's the vignetting results on the EOS R full frame, on the 150-600 contemporary lens. So let's jump to the Aps-C tests that we're going to do on the 90D, and hopefully we'll see how that performs. Okay, here we have the Aps-C 90D tests of vignetting. We're going to go through the apertures again, just to run through the darkness that you tend to get. The thing is, what I will say is, you're more likely to see a lot of vignetting on full frame sensors opposed to Aps-C, because Aps-C magnifies the center of the lens, so the majority of vignetting happens in the corners, so you're not really going to see much. So, you know, I thought I'd just show this anyway, just like I've done with the EOS R full frame, and it'll give you an idea on vignetting. So let's just run through the apertures. So 150mm at f5. Let's have a look at f5.6. Very little difference. 6.3. f8. f16. Okay, now we're at 300 millimeters. Get to see a bit more in terms of detail here to see what can be rendered with Aps-C. So we're at F5.6 here. That's 6.3, very little difference at all really. F8, F16, and that's 300 millimeters. So let's have a look at 500 millimeters. That's at F6.3. That's at F8. Tiny bit of sharpness you might see there, but very little. F16, again, very little difference there as well. So let's look at 600 millimeters now. That's at 6.3. Let's have a look at F8. Very little difference. And then F16. That's the main difference between Vignetting on Aps-C. You're not going to see any difference, and if I'm honest with you, sharpness is minimal. It does seem to me that on Aps-C, on the 600mm zoom lenses, both on Tamron and Sigma, I think you see a slight degrading quality at F16 because of diffraction coming into the image. So I think these lenses are quite strong at f6.3, despite what other people were saying regarding them being quite soft at 6.3. I think they're pretty good at f6.3 on Aps-C. It's a bit different with full frame, because in full frame what I'm finding is that f6.3 is okay, not great. It improves at f8 and improves again at f16. I do think the Tamron lens is better at f16, where I think the Sigma is better at f8. So there is a little bit of difference there, where I think you have to stop the Tamron lens a lot more down to get good results versus the Sigma, because I think at f8 you can get good results on the Sigma on full frame, but you can't say the same of the Tamron. I think you have to stop down even more so, maybe even 2 stops sometimes, to try and get equivalent sharpness. So that's the assessment of the Vignetting. I hope this was helpful, and hope to see you in another assessment video. Thank you for watching.